Travis Macy, welcome to Bendiksen Airways.
Yeah, thanks, Alexander. Awesome to be here with you today, and of course with the audience as well.
How's life in the US at the moment?
Well, let me start with life here in Salida, Colorado. I'm looking out the window. I mean, I live in the heart of the Colorado Rockies at 7,000 feet in elevation. You know, it's early May and spring is here. Things are getting green. It's still snowing here and there, but the ski season's pretty much over. Getting into running, biking, kid sports, soccer, and all that. So, life here is good. Life in the U.S. For an international audience, it's a dynamic time. There's friction, I mean, we have a president that was elected lawfully, and we have a very strong percentage of the country, myself included, who, strongly disapprove of what's happening in terms of international relations, trade wars, how people are being treated, shipping people out to bad places around the world. So, I guess, we're not so much talking politics here, but when you say how is life in the US, I mean that stuff's relevant. And I often wonder, I mean, maybe I should ask you, like, what does the world think of the United States right now? Like, how in the world do you elect this guy, right?
I think a lot of people are thinking that, yeah. But thankfully, we don't have to talk about politics.
Yeah, no, that sounds good to me too. I'm not way into politics. I host a podcast, and it's not about politics. It's probably some of your same topics, but endurance sports and self-improvement, reading, that kind of stuff. I listen to a little news, follow the headlines, but mostly I try to keep a bit of distance from that stuff too. But I do vote because that makes a difference.
Sounds like a healthy approach. I came across your name because I found a book that seemed interesting. It came out in 2015, The Ultra Mindset. But before we dive into that and the topic surrounding it, how would you introduce yourself?
Well, I do a lot of things, have a range of titles. I think mostly I'm someone who loves being outside. I love exercising. I'm a family-centered person. I'm a creative and energetic person, and those are probably kind of the roots of it. Some of the things I've done, which are I've learned over time to maybe separate a bit of those, hey, what are you doing, or what are the things that you've done, is separating that from the identity, which definitely at times, especially as a younger athlete, as a professional athlete, there was a lot of merging of the identity with, the outcome, the achievement, what am I, I'm a pro runner, I'm a pro adventure racer, those kind of things. So, feeling a bit of distance from that, which generally I'm proud of, but, work-wise, I coach adult endurance athletes. I write books. There's that one, The Ultra Mindset. We have another one called The Mile at a Time that came out a couple years ago. I host a couple of podcasts. One is the Travis Macy Show, and the newer one is called Ski-Mo Gold. It's about ski mountaineering, which is a unique and neat sport that's coming into the Olympics about a year from now. And so we started a podcast about that, and I also do some keynote speaking as well, and spend a lot of time as a dad. My kids are 12 and 14, and they play sports, and we live in a small rural town, and that means that any competitions are usually at least 2 hours away. So I spend time on the road with my kids and with my community. So yeah, those are some of the things I do.
You got a lot on your plate, sounds like.
Yeah, it's a good, it's a good, especially when I'm feeling overwhelmed by the kid stuff and the logistics. I remind myself that it's a phase, and it won't last forever. And I think sometimes that perspective is is healthy. Sometimes I wish when I was kind of, really competing a lot as an athlete and had that identity so kind of merged, with the outcomes of the podium, the prize money, seeing it as a phase, and that's cool. When something's a phase, when it's not going to last, you can appreciate it.
Yeah. So what drew you to the ultra endurance stuff when you were younger?
Yeah, as I talk about that in the book, The Ultra Mindset, and probably also in the other book, A Mile at a Time, I kind of grew up around it. Honestly, my dad was into it. He came into, sort of probably it would have been his mid to late 30s. He heard about the Ironman and decided he wanted to do that. And then shortly thereafter, heard about the Leadville 100 trail run, a famous ultra run here in Colorado. And he went out and did those things. And I was a kid, watching from afar and learning and just, in some ways taking it for granted. But being around these kind of things, they seemed pretty normal to me. At that time as a kid, I was also doing the normal, typical ball sports, soccer, basketball, baseball, whatever. But I kind of always figured like, hey, I'm going to try that stuff someday. The ultra running, the adventure racing. My dad started doing those eco challenge races. People might remember from TV in the mid 90s. And, there was an allure, the sense of adventure, of excitement, of teamwork. Those were things I wanted to experience. And, I ended up doing it especially after I finished college, kind of really got into the adventure racing full on and spent a number of years traveling around the world, doing the big races. There was not an eco challenge at that time, but there's the World Championship and there's these other various series. There's these races in China, that had awesome competition and big prize money. And, you'd never know about it unless you were watching some obscure Chinese TV channel or something. But really got into those and had a lot of fun and a lot of adventure. And a lot of challenge as well.
How does a training week look for someone who's professionally doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alexander. In adventure racing, you kind of have, it's a bit like triathlon in that there's three key disciplines. In adventure racing, that would be running, or often in the long races, it's trekking, kind of hiking, a lot of hiking mixed with running. The second being mountain biking, and the third one being paddling. In adventure racing, the paddling, it's often kayaks. It could also be canoe style paddling. It could be in a raft. It could be stand-up paddle boards. But especially the big races at the international level, the paddling is significant. I mean, you're getting into sea kayak and you're going to be sitting in that thing for 10 hours or 12 or 16 hours. The fitness is really important. And also the skill of the form, etc. So, how do you train? Well, you want to do all those kind of, like a triathlete might train, run, bike, swim, doing, hitting all of those in a given week. If you look at one particular discipline, a standard approach within a week, you probably want to have a longer session in that discipline. You probably want to have some sort of intensity session in that discipline. That could be, intervals. Maybe it's a hard group ride, the track workout, whatever. You might have, let's say, some sort of skill-oriented session in that discipline. Mountain biking, that would be riding technical terrain. Running, it could be trekking or, hiking up and down a mountain on steep stuff with route finding and navigation. Paddling, there's a whole lot of skills, but whitewater, for example, or paddling in the surf or whatever. And then maybe, if you hit those three, that'd be 9 sessions in a week, which is quite a bit. Maybe there's time, depending on, phase of life, whatever, energy, maybe there's also like an easy recovery session. So, that could be one way to approach it. You also, if you're doing those longer adventure races, people might have seen like the World's Toughest Race was on Amazon Prime a few years ago. They kind of brought back the Eco Challenge with Bear Grylls just for 1 year, right before COVID.
What does Eco Challenge mean?
So Eco Challenge is one of the main adventure races, and again, this was on TV from 95 to the early 2000s. Mark Burnett founded it, and it's a 4-person team race. You're doing those disciplines I mentioned. You're also navigating. It's not a marked course, so you're using map and compass to navigate the whole way through the desert or the woods or the mountains or whatever. The navigation is huge. That's actually that's kind of the 5th discipline. And there are other ones. There's rope stuff as well. And then usually it's a 4-person co-ed team that travels together. The shorter races, at the local level might be half a day or a day. And then these longer expedition races, again, like the Eco Challenge or like the World's Toughest Race that was on Amazon Prime Video. Actually, you can still find it there. That's a race of up to 10 days. So maybe 5-6 days for the winners, 10 days for the back of the pack.
Interesting. How would a triathlete match up or stack up against an ultra endurance athlete?
That's a great question. There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of people who've been great triathletes who, shift into the ultra running or the adventure racing or the endurance multi-sport. Like I coach a lot of people every year in a series here in Leadville, Colorado. It's called the Lead Challenge. And within 6 weeks, you do a high altitude marathon, you do a 50-mile biker run, you do a 100-mile mountain bike. And then a week after that, you do a 100-mile run. So, high altitude running and biking, but it's longer. It's probably more dynamic even than an Ironman. I coach a lot of people who, hey, they've done a bunch of Ironmans. They want to change in scenery. They come and do this. And maybe they do great, or maybe it's the other way. People getting into triathlon. I think the main shift, the physicality, honestly, the fitness, a lot of that's the same. It's the same, endurance and probably some high end strength. The same principles of fueling, taking care of yourself. Really, the shifts are mental and psychological and outlook wise. And some people can do that. I was coaching a guy last year. Again, he's done a ton of triathlons. He did the Lead Challenge, and I helped him work through a lot of those shifts. If you're doing, again, stereotypically the triathlon mindset, it's pretty type A. It's really controlling everything. It's, I'm out on the run. Oh, my last mile was 7:01 instead of 7, flat. Oh God, like that kind of real detail orientation, etc. And some of that has to be relinquished a bit when you get into the mountains, when you get into these longer, more dynamic races where the weather's going to change, you're going to have problems. It's less of having the perfect race, which you might, an Olympic distance triathlon, maybe even an Ironman, you might, here is my plan and I'm going to execute and I'm going to follow the fueling and the pacing and I'm going to ride my bike. I'm going to get it to my power level and just do it, and I'm going to hit my run and I'm going to hit every mile the same. You might be able to do that for a whole Ironman. Like you get into a 100-mile run or an adventure race, like, man, shit's going to fall apart and you have to be ready for that. So a lot of that is a psychological shift of, what's plan A, B, C, and D, and all of those go out the window. What are my skills to think on my feet and solve problems and not freak out because something has gone wrong?
How do you not freak out? How do you prepare? How do you make your brain stronger? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. How to not freak out. I mean, again, that book, The Ultra Mindset, it's kind of about that. I think, oh man, it's funny. I think for some people, myself included, like, I tend to I feel pretty calm in some environments that for some people might be really stressful or uncomfortable. I think, like in the winter here in Colorado, I like this ski mountaineering sport. Like you ski uphill with climbing skins and then you ski back down. And like, man, I love getting out there in the dark and the cold and the wind. And, it's uncomfortable, but it also it just kind of, whether it's because of my life experience or just maybe because I'm kind of wired that way, it just kind of feels good, and sometimes I sort of get that feeling, in an adventure race, maybe there is a very strained situation in terms of safety, in terms of navigation, in terms of, you're in the middle of the night and you're sleep deprived and like, man, are we going to risk going down this canyon, or are we going to go up and around the mountain or something? Like, typically I kind of feel good in those situations, often better than I feel in the day to day, which sometimes is kind of, I like high stimulation. Like I have an ADHD diagnosis, and that intensity and that stimulation actually feels kind of grounding. Sometimes I feel less good in the day to day, sort of making it through. So, there's that piece, and we all have our unique mental and psychological and physical makeup. So I think knowing yourself would be one great step. Knowing what are you naturally inclined to, what are natural challenges, and also working on those. So working on mental skills, putting yourself in tough challenges, thinking through what are the stories that you're going to go to, what are the real deep motivators when things get hard, practicing those and planning those. Because if you're not clear on those, and if the default, and I would say this is true in a 100-mile run or an adventure race, but also in your career, in your relationship, whatever it is, like these things are hard. And if the attitude is like, well, when it gets hard, I'm just going to kind of see how I feel or what I want to do, like, then you're probably going to veer away from it or stop going or whatever, which can be fine. Like, I think it's totally fine to re-choose or to stop doing something if that's the right fit. But if you want to steer yourself in that direction of perseverance, you need to think ahead about what are the stories and tools you're going to use at that moment. And then another big piece of it, I would say, another reason I love adventure racing, I also love it in sports like ultra running, where you have a support crew, is a team component. And so that's huge. Who do you surround yourself with? How are you working together? How are you playing off each other? And adventure races are great because out of those 4 people, everyone's going to have many times where they're the strongest person on the team and they're carrying more weight, they're pulling, they're leading the way, and everyone's going to have times where they're the weakest person on the team and they need help physically, psychologically, nutritionally, relationally, whatever it is. And that's super cool.
Yeah. So you spoke about you should know yourself. But I'm guessing if you don't know yourself, I'm guessing you get to know yourself during such tough challenges like that. Can you speak a bit about how you have developed personally, especially when you were really active in your career? What did you learn about yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alexander. Yeah, you learn a lot, I think, through these. And that's another reason, these days I do less competing and more coaching. And that's something I love, is helping people really ferret out and then grapple with, like, why are you doing this and what can you get out of it? And hopefully it's more than just the time, the place, the buckle, So what can you get out of it? Well, let's start with, I would advise in my opinion, what I don't think you should try to get out of it is proving something. Because if you're, sometimes people, they have this idea, when I run a marathon, then I will know I'm tough or I'm good enough or I'm, fill in the blank. When I can finish a 100-miler, then I will have proved to myself that, whatever it is we're trying to prove. And, through all of my experience, through, being a teammate and coach of so many athletes, one of my conclusions is, like, whatever you're trying to prove or overcome or conquer nature, I think it's already there. And I actually don't think the best way to find that is via, the win, the time, conquering the competition. So, I would advise that people be on the lookout for that. But what can you get? What can you learn? You can learn new levels of resilience, of compassion, of self-understanding, of human connection. That is often one of the coolest things that comes out of this, whether it's your teammates in an adventure race or someone doing an ultra run or a mountain bike race. And man, you connect with these other people out there, and maybe you're competing against each other, but you're also connected and you're helping each other and you're encouraging each other. Or maybe you're becoming friends, or, at the end, you're sharing like, man, I love a good race. Like 2 or more people coming in together, racing for the line. That is awesome for everyone, and whether you win or lose or, end up 37th, like that is cool. And people celebrate that, like what a cool thing to celebrate. And then I would also say, one thing, as a younger athlete, I didn't embrace this as much. And, for me, more naturally, it was this man against nature. I'm conquering this mountain. I'm going to tough it out in the storm, like that kind of thing. And there's been a shift in my thinking to like, this is actually man with nature. And for me, that has been recently a great takeaway is like a connection with something bigger, with the world, with pausing and slowing down to take a picture or to just stop at a beautiful place and be silent and maybe spin around 360 degrees and take that all in. That I think is, that's both gaining something, taking in an energy and connection, but also giving something to the world, some energy, some connection, some enthusiasm that you can then share in the rest of the parts of your life. So, yeah, I think there's so much, and I think many people can relate to even just any exercise. For me, especially doing it in the morning, getting up and do it whatever way works for you. Maybe it's lifting weights, maybe it's getting on the treadmill, maybe it's the pool. For me, it's usually biking or running or skiing. But man, when I can do that in the morning, I'm calm, I'm happy, I'm enthusiastic, I'm ready for whatever may come for the rest of the day.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of people don't ever get to know where their limits are?
Yeah, probably. I would say that, but I would say a lot of, especially in a physical sense, like many people go through life and they don't. Part of what I still believe in is, taking on a physical challenge, a physical and psychological challenge by choice, because going through that, again, win, lose, or draw, just toeing the line, going through the process, that's helping you build and fill a well of resilience that you can draw from, when the shit hits the fan in life, which it will. And I think that's something we can all relate to. Life is hard, whether it's your work or your relationships or medical diagnosis or, or the politics that we just talked about. Like, things will be hard. And I would venture to say, in the course of a typical lifetime, I mean, in one way or another, people are pushed to their limit, or to what they thought was their limit, and then they're able to persevere or draw upon it, or crack and fall apart, but then come back and be okay again. So, I don't know. I would say in the course of most lifetimes, people are going to hit their limits. And I think you can be more prepared, by taking on hard, I know for me, and like our second book kind of talks about this, like my dad, who is my friend, my teammate, my crew for so many of these adventure races, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And like, man, that journey over the last 7 years now, like that has pushed me to and beyond my limits and beyond cracking, but then coming back again, many times, and I think I'm better prepared for it through the adventure racing and stuff. But like, did adventure racing and ultra running tell me everything I needed to navigate this journey? No, it couldn't. Some things you have to learn in the moment, and the only way is through.
Yeah. You just said it there, because that was my next question. Preparation. How
Mm.
important is preparation, and how many athletes in no matter the sport do you think neglect preparing beforehand?
Yeah, preparation's huge, and it really is. Again, I think back to my coaching, like most of the magic really is in that process, the preparation, the daily routine, the daily, you could call it, sometimes it's a grind, but hopefully it's also fun. And I think hopefully it's fun, it's energy, it's human connection, it's adventure, it's exploration. All of those are part of the preparation, preparing your nutrition, preparing your gear, learning all the sport specific skills. It's huge, and again, I think that's where the joy is. Sometimes you hear, I'm always a little iffy when someone's, oh, I signed up for the New York City Marathon. I hate running and I don't want to train, but I signed up for the marathon. And in my mind, I'm like, well, if you don't like running, then don't sign up. Like, sign up for something you like. Choose a goal for which the preparation process aligns with something bigger. And there's an element, again, some of it's going to be hard, but a lot of it should be fun. Choose things you enjoy.
Yeah. Has to be fun, or it should be fun.
Yeah.
Could you take us through the 8 core principles you speak about in your book for success in business, sports, and life?
Oh man, I may need to ask you. I don't have the book in front of me.
You don't have to go into each step, but just speak broadly on the principles.
Yeah. So these are, again, man, written 10 years ago. It's funny when you think back on any book, whether even if it's fiction, it kind of provides a window into the author at that period of time, which is interesting looking back. I mean, I'm 10 years older. My kids are 10 years old. It's a different phase of life. And most of it I look back on fondly, and I think it was good stuff. One of them that stands out to me is, I think it's chapter 7. It's like the stories we tell ourselves, and I touched on this a bit before. This could be sort of aligned with CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. It's kind of the idea that, like, we have some choice in the stories, first of all, that go through our minds, or maybe the first step is just that awareness of what are the stories or voices or parts that are going through my mind, and then trying to cultivate a choice between that. And it doesn't mean, sort of blocking out the ones that we, don't want to roll with or whatever. And actually, I've learned it's more of kind of accepting those, but also maybe following the other ones, or cultivating those stories ahead of time to help yourself get through them, and having some choice in it. I've often said that chapter of the book, I think maybe is one of the most powerful, and for me is one of the hardest. Okay, I wrote a chapter about this book. I did a lot of research. I've spoken about it here and there. And it's hard. I think it's none of these things are like things. Oh, boom, got that done. I'm good forever. It's a hard one. Let's see. Another one was called the 4:30 a.m. rule, and that was the idea that, like, you're going to get up early to do some training or something, and the time that you make the commitment to that is like when you're setting the alarm. Again, it's not, the alarm's going to go off at 4:30 and am I going to see how I feel at that moment? Do I feel like getting up and doing my training? Well, the answer is no. You're not going to feel like doing it. But if you've committed to it ahead of time, then you probably can, and you will. That said, I will add the caveat. I wonder if I wrote the book now, maybe I'd call it the 5:30 a.m. rule or something, because via especially my dad's journey with Alzheimer's and just what we've learned, like, sleep is so important, and that's something I'm constantly, not only have tweaked in my own life, but constantly counseling athletes and my own kids, people I'm in contact. Like, sleep is really, really important. It's very important, not only for day-to-day recovery and function, but also cognitive wellness over time. So, Yeah, make sure you get your sleep.
Right.
If there's any particular ones that you have a question about, I'm happy to go into those. Or let me ask you this, Alexander, when you initially read the book or flipping through it, did any of them stand out to you as personally helpful, or even more interesting? Did you read one and you're like, oh man, that's a bunch of BS. I don't agree with that.
Well, it's been 10 years, like you said, but I've gone through it now recently, obviously. But I think first and foremost, discipline, like you said, like you spoke about now.
Yeah.
There has to be some discipline. Like if you set the alarm, whenever it is, get up. If you say that, okay, on Tuesday I'm doing this, do it. Because without that, it's not gonna go anywhere. So I think that's the most important part for me. But what I'm most interested in is I'm a football coach, or soccer, as you would say.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah.
I read your book, and I read a lot of similar books at that time, which really captivated me and gave me some tools to work with my players, because and especially how to cope with suffering, how to cope with adversity.
Yeah.
Obviously, a football match is only like 90 minutes long, and it's nowhere to compare it to ultra endurance. But at the same time, you go through ups and downs through the game, and you see a lot of players that really are not able to think next action. They get caught up in the referee, or they made a mistake, or were down 2 goals, etc. So I'm a bit interested in what you think about how to develop the handling of adversity, and how you, in your coach life, try to give your athletes these important tools.
Yeah. That's a great question. I'm a big, I grew up playing football, or soccer as we call it. Both my kids are playing it now. I think it's a great sport. And I think, again, in my view, the first step is just anticipating adversity. Like, I think there's a value, in visualization before the game or the race or the test or the keynote talk. Visualization is great. And, typically, or at least as I've been taught, it would be visualizing like this perfect performance, this perfect delivery of the keynote, the football game where we get off to the right start, and we have the momentum, and we're building out of the back and moving to the front. Whatever you're trying to, you're imagining those things. What I've often done with my athletes, and I try to do myself, is mixing into that, like, the challenges, or even walking through. I can imagine in a team, a guided team visualization process, like, so and so just gets a yellow card, and what do we do now? Or like, all of a sudden we're down 2-0, and we got 20 minutes left. Like, how are we going to handle that? I think it's thinking through those things, and I would also say, as a coach or a leader, we set the tone so much, and and if something bad happens and the coach freaks out and is all whatever, going off on the ref, or oh my god, or exploding at halftime, how the hell get who knows? We all know what it's like when a coach goes off, and we've probably done it as coaches. But that's a cue, I think, to the team that, like, things have gone to shit and we can't come back from this, So if the coach can hold composure, and then the captains or the other leaders can hold composure, and then everyone can somehow, I'm really interested in momentum, because of momentum in team sports. It's such an amazing thing. Somehow can we get that momentum back? Then we can build through it. So, and I would also say I've heard of creative things, and I've done this in my own training. I've also tried to build it in with, training individual athletes, throwing in surprises in training, and throwing in, it could be a surprise, or it could be, for an endurance athlete, like, man, the weather's shitty, it's freezing cold. Well, go out there, and maybe this is not going to be the best day of, like, physical training, but, like, this is a mental training day. Like, you need to be okay with what is it like to run or bike in this snowstorm. I remember, hearing about, I was a Chicago Bulls fan in the the Michael Jordan era, and they'd be at practice, and all of a sudden Phil Jackson would change things up, or Michael Jordan would be on one team and they'd be winning, and then he'd switch Michael Jordan to the other team that's now down, and that's changing things up, and now they got to come back. So I think it's cool and creative when coaches throw in bits of adversity like that in the midst of a scrimmage or preparation. And there's of course sport specific ways to do that, whatever you're coaching, at any level.
Really interesting you brought up Michael Jordan there, because I'm guessing you've seen The Last Dance on Netflix.
Yeah, I watched it like 3 times. I mean,
it's amazing.
It's fascinating.
What did you get out of it, and what do you think about Michael Jordan's mind or brain?
Yeah. Oh man, The Last Dance. I've had a bunch of takeaways. Let's start with Phil Jackson and then Dennis Rodman, and then we'll get to Jordan. But Phil Jackson, so this guy, for those who don't know, the coach of the Bulls, and then I think he won other championships, I recall, with the Lakers and stuff. But what I really liked in the early 90s, which is kind of before some of these things became in vogue, he was incorporating mindfulness practices at the highest level in terms of, I think, yoga, some spirituality, et cetera, in a really cool way. And what I also really like is it seemed to me that he was able to differentiate his coaching to very specific players. So what Michael Jordan needed to thrive was different from what Scottie Pippen needed, or very different, especially from what someone like Dennis Rodman needed. And learning more about him in that process was amazing, because here is a guy who, is portrayed as the bad boy, the loose cannon. And some of that's probably true, but he also was an incredibly intellectual player in addition to a skilled player. And the scene that stands out to me is they're in the playoffs. And Rodman basically comes to Coach Jackson and says, "Coach, I need to leave for 48. I need to leave and go to Vegas and party." And they're like, "Dennis, what do you mean? We're in the playoffs right now." But somehow Phil Jackson tapped into this is what this guy needs to thrive right now. And so he and Jordan and Scottie Pippen got together, and they're like, "Okay, well, let's give Dennis 48 hours." And Rodman goes to Vegas, and he's partying with Carmen Electra, and survives, and he gets back 2 days too late. But then he's actually really good and he's ready to go. So I thought that was amazing. In terms of Michael Jordan, who of course was one of my, as a young person, one of my idols, in addition to Lance Armstrong and Greg LeMond and Mark Allen. Learning more about Jordan's psychology, it's sort of, and to some extent Lance Armstrong as well, for me, it begged the question, is it possible to be the best of the best, on paper or most of the time, without sometimes being the worst of the worst? And that, we see that coming across in terms of Jordan's treatment of teammates, getting in fights at practice, bullying younger players on the team. So I don't know. I don't, that's still a question that's in my mind. I don't know the answer. I mean, I feel like when I look at, an athlete like Tadej Pogacar, the best cyclist right now, and maybe the best ever, it appears to me that here's a person who's actually a nice guy and probably is a good teammate as well. Yeah. And so, that inspires me. But I don't know. What do you think? Any brief takeaways for you or your coaching when you watch The Last Dance?
Yeah, because things have changed so much in society since that time, and for me, it's changed. It's gone too far to the left or right. Doesn't matter. That people, I think most, I have a lot of players that they say they're really ambitious, etc., but they don't practice at the level they should, and they definitely do not hold teammates accountable when they know they should. So that leader part is, I think that's a real that we don't have it. It's really rare. That's my experience, at least. And if someone tries to, it's like, oh, you can't do that, you can't be like that, you can't behave like that, even though it's not bullying, it's just making sure that the practice is at the level it needs to be if we are going to be this good as we say we want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I also think, one thing you see about Jordan, and I think you saw it with Wayne Gretzky, Kobe Bryant, like these are people where something in their natural wiring, it had the competition, and it also had like you could call it obsession, but I think for them, like, this is just the way they operated. Like they weren't like changing something about their makeup to behave this way. It's just like the way they were. And particularly in terms of, like you said, the practicing, the time, the day after day, the Kobe Bryant is at the Olympics and he's getting up at 4 a.m. to go shoot 1 million free throws or whatever. Like, that's just how they operated, and it was a great fit with being a professional athlete.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time here, but what would you say are the main factors to bring into your personal life from what you've learned and what you've written about? Well, what's like the main things?
Yeah. Oh man. The grit and determination for sure. And these races, the ultra runs, adventure races, like you get so wrecked and so smashed and so, ruined physically, but then you come back. Even in terms of a single race, like you can feel so terrible, and logically, the story is like, oh my God, if I'm at mile 50 of a run, and if I feel this bad now, at mile 100, I'm going to feel twice as bad, and that's not even possible. And as it turns out, like, usually that doesn't last, especially if you can maintain some amount of positivity, if you can eat and drink and move and connect with other people around you, your crew, whatever, you'll probably be feeling better. And I think that's a great takeaway at life, because we have challenges, we have low moments, in terms of, again, relationship, career, mental health, whatever it is. Often at that low moment, a story that pops into my mind, like, it's always going to be this bad, right? It's never going to get better. But I feel like I've learned it can get better even when things look really bad. And then I've also learned, like, hey, things are going really good and I feel on top of the world, which is a great feeling. That's another reason to do these sports. Like, man, you are in the flow. You're loving it. You're living like you're on the razor edge of life. And that feels great. And I've kind of learned to maybe temper that a little, like, hey, this is not going to last forever, so let's appreciate it and be in the moment and be okay with when it kind of, tails off a little bit. So, there's those pieces. I've learned a lot about interacting with people, like you said, also about discipline and just in routine and creating the if we want to move forward in any area, we've got to create the systems and structures and habits to make that happen. Because none of it happens, overnight or out of anywhere. Writing. I was able to write a couple books and get them published, and, like, man, those were epic journeys, and it took forever and ever, and it was way harder than I thought it would be. And those were things that I learned from the sports. It may take longer and be harder, and that's okay.
Yeah. Great. Last question. What's the meaning of life?
That's a good one. I think it. I would encourage anyone to figure out their own meaning and kind of keep examining it. I think it'll probably change over time, I would say, for most people. If I was maybe to sum things up, at this point, I think I'm at a phase where the word impact comes to mind, and I don't know if does that mean making the world a better place than it would have been without you? Does it mean changing people's lives? I think one thing that's come to me recently in terms of impact is my initial inclination, I think this is true of a lot of people, especially in the age of social media, is that impact is measurable in terms of breadth. What are the number of podcast downloads or book sales or followers on Instagram or likes on the post? Those are all breadth. But I've actually learned and kind of leaned into, and to me, it feels really good. Like, what about the depth? What about the depth of any connection or impact that you have? So less about how many people can I engage with, maybe at sort of a surface level, and more about of the people I do connect with, and that could be in person, that could be in the coaching, that maybe it is social media or podcasting or, film or whatever, a book, but what is the depth of impact, for as many of those as possible. So, yeah, that's something I'm really focused on right now. And honestly, my phase of life as a parent, of two kids, who, again, back to the phases, I got 6 more years with kids at home. That's a really important thing to me right now.
Travis, this was great. I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, Alexander, thank you, man. Wait, let me ask you, meaning of life. Do you have an answer? Do you have a, something that guides you?
Yeah, I think what you say resonate, but I think have fun and make sure that as many people that also have fun.
Nice. I like it.
So
I
what
really
I got.
like that. Fun's a big piece of it. Even sometimes we get so caught up in the goal, the results, the outcome, whatever, and we forget a very, very, very important tool to getting there is fun. Because I tell my clients all the time, if you want to get fitter and faster, consistency and sustainability are the key. Those are way more important than doing some crazy workout on a given day or whatever. You got to be consistent, and it has to be sustainable. And you know what helps those? Fun.
Exactly. All right. Nice talking to you.
All right. Thanks, Alexander. See you later.
Tusen takk for at du hørte på Bendiksen Airways. Dersom du har tips, kommentarer eller vil gi en vurdering av episoden, så gjør gjerne det. Det setter jeg stor pris på.